The night my brother got the check, my mother made pot roast. I remember that detail because it felt so wrong. The smell of rosemary and garlic filling the house, my dad carving the meat like it was Thanksgiving, everyone acting like something worth celebrating had just happened, and I sat there at the corner of the table, cutting my food into smaller and smaller pieces, not eating any of it, trying to figure out why I felt like I was about to cry. My brother got $180,000 that evening. My parents wrote him a check, actual paper, blue ink, my father's careful handwriting, and slid it across the table like it was a birthday card. I got a nod and my mother saying, "You'll figure it out. You always do." I was 31 years old. I had been figuring things out on my own since I was 22. Growing up, our house ran on a single, unspoken rulebook that I didn't fully understand until I was an adult. My brother, 2 years younger, louder, more certain about everything, was the one my parents believed in. Not because he'd done anything to earn it, not because he was smarter or worked harder, just because he moved through the world the way my parents wanted their child to move through it. Confident, ambitious about the right things, interested in money and what money could signal. I was interested in making things. When I was 15, I convinced my dad to let me use the corner of the garage. I built a bookshelf from scrap wood I'd picked up at a salvage yard 2 blocks from our house in Knoxville. It was crooked and one of the shelves sagged, but I'd made it with my hands and I was so proud I took pictures of it before we moved it inside. My dad looked at it for a long moment and said, "Practical." That was the whole review. When my brother was 15, he started a neighborhood lawn business and made $300 in one summer. My parents talked about it for a year. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the atmosphere I grew up breathing. The message wasn't ever spoken aloud, it was in the silences. In what got celebrated and what got a nod, in whose name came up at dinner and whose didn't. I learned early that I was the responsible one, which in my family was a polite way of saying I was the one who didn't need anything. After college, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. I'd found a part-time job at a small custom furniture shop, and I spent my off hours in a rented studio space teaching myself joinery, finishing, the kind of craft that takes years to get right and that most people don't notice until it's missing. I was earning $28,000 a year and living on rice and whatever produce was marked down at the co-op on Lexington Avenue. I called home every Sunday. My mother asked if I was seeing anyone. My father asked if I was saving anyone. My father asked if I was saving. My brother wasn't mentioned unless he'd done something new, a promotion, a move, a new girlfriend my parents had already met twice. I wasn't resentful then. I was too tired and too busy learning things to be resentful. By 27, I was running the shop part-time while the owner dealt with a health issue, and I had a small but real client list of my own. By 29, I took out a small business loan, $22,000, and signed the lease on a space in West Asheville, a former auto shop with high ceilings and good light. I named it after nothing in particular, just my last initial and the street number. It wasn't glamorous. It was a room full of sawdust and noise and work. I went home for Christmas that year. My brother had just been promoted to regional sales director at a logistics company. My mother had framed a news article about the company from the Knoxville Business Journal and hung it in the hallway. There was no framed anything about me. I told myself it didn't matter. I went back to Asheville in January and worked 14-hour days because work was the one place the math always made sense. The summer I turned 31, my brother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of sanding a dining table 8 feet of white oak for a couple in Biltmore Forest, and I almost didn't pick up. We weren't close in the way siblings on TV are close. We talked occasionally, kept things surface level, wished each other happy birthday. He told me he'd left his job. He said he had a business idea, something in the tech space, an app for restaurant inventory management, and he was going to build it out and pitch it to investors. He said he was talking to mom and dad. I said that sounded like a big step. I meant it neutrally. He said they were excited. He said they believed in it. I didn't think much about that conversation until 2 months later when I went home for my cousin's wedding and my parents sat us both down at the kitchen table after dinner. Pot roast, rosemary, garlic, and my father slid a check across to my brother. $180,000. My mother said it was their retirement savings, the inheritance portion they'd planned to split between us when the time came, and they wanted to give my brother his share now, while it could do the most good. She said it clearly and carefully, like she'd rehearsed it, and then she looked at me and said they'd discussed it and they felt my situation was more stable, and so they were confident I could wait. Wait for what? I didn't ask. My brother looked at the check and nodded like it confirmed something he'd already known. I sat very still and thought about the $22,000 loan I was still paying off. I thought about the one winter I'd eaten mostly peanut butter sandwiches because I couldn't make rent and cover supplies at the same time. I thought about every Sunday phone call where my father asked if I was saving, as though I was a person who simply chose not to, out of carelessness. I thought about the bookshelf. Practical. I didn't cry at the table. I didn't say anything that started a fight. I helped clear the dishes and I drove back to my hotel and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time staring at the carpet. I called my best friend back in Asheville. She listened to the whole thing and then she said, "What do you need right now?" I said I didn't know. She said, "That's okay. You don't have to know tonight. I want to stop here and say something because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, parents can do what they want with their own money. You're thinking, maybe the brother needed it more. Maybe there are sides to this I'm not seeing. You're right that I don't have perfect vision about my own life. Nobody does. But what I know, what I felt in my body sitting at that table, wasn't just about the money. The money was a symbol of something my parents had been communicating my entire life without ever saying it plainly. That they saw me as someone who had already gotten what she needed from them, and that thing she'd gotten was the expectation of independence. They were proud of me the way you're proud of a door that shuts properly. Quietly, without requiring anything from you. My brother was the investment. I was the proof it wasn't necessary. That's what the $180,000 said. Not the number itself, but the decision behind it. I drove back to Asheville the next day. I didn't call to say I'd made it home safe. My mother called 3 days later. She said she hoped I understood and that this wasn't a statement about our relationship and that they loved both of us equally. She said the word equally twice. I let her finish. And then I said, very carefully, that I needed some time. That I wasn't angry. I said that even though I was, because I didn't have words yet for the shape of what I was feeling. And I would be in touch. She said she understood. I don't think she did. I stopped answering Sunday calls. It wasn't a decision I announced. I just stopped picking up. My father texted once, asking if everything was okay. I replied, "I need some time. I'll reach out when I'm ready." He didn't text again. My brother called 4 months after the dinner. He said he'd heard I was being weird and that Mom was worried. I said I wasn't being weird. I said I was processing something and I was doing it privately, the way our family had always expected me to handle things privately. He got quiet at that. I could hear him trying to figure out if that was an accusation. It was. He said, "I didn't ask them to do it." I said, "I know. That's not the point." We didn't talk again for almost 2 years. Those 2 years were hard and also, somehow, clarifying. I put everything into the shop. I hired my first full-time employee, a guy named Freddie who'd been doing woodworking as a hobby and needed a chance, and then a second one. A woman fresh out of a trade program in Boone who turned out to be the most precise finish carpenter I'd ever seen. I started getting referrals from an interior design firm in Charlotte, then one in Atlanta. I did a custom library build-out for a house in Highlands that got photographed for a regional magazine. I'm not telling you this to prove anything about success. I'm telling you because those 2 years taught me something I hadn't fully understood before, that I was genuinely capable, and that I had built something real, and that I had done it without anyone handing me the starting line. That knowledge changed something in me. Not in a triumphant way. In a quieter way. The way understanding your own weight feels different from someone telling you how much you weigh. I still thought about my family. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. Sunday mornings were strange for a long time. That old reflex of reaching for my phone and then remembering I'd let the routine go. My mother's birthday passed in October and I sent a card. Not a letter. A card. Something with a flower on it and a few lines of handwriting that said I hoped she was well and that I was thinking of her. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I don't think those are the only two options. It was a Wednesday in early March when my brother came into the shop. I heard the bell on the door and called out from the back that I'd be a minute. I was in the middle of fitting a drawer box and I needed to finish the pass. When I came out into the front space, he was standing near the window looking at a walnut side table I had on display, hands in his jacket pockets, trying to look like he'd wandered in casually. He hadn't wandered in casually. Asheville is not on the way to anywhere from Knoxville. He'd driven 2.5 hours on purpose. I said his name. He turned around. He looked older. We both did. He said, I was in the area. I let that sit there for a moment. Then I said, no, you weren't. He almost smiled. I brought him to the small office I have in the corner. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looks out on the side street, and made coffee. He held the mug with both hands and told me things I hadn't known. The app had launched. It got early traction. Then a competitor with more funding came out with something similar and better, and within 8 months, the traction was gone. He'd spent 18 months trying to pivot, burning through the money, and eventually had to shut it down. Of the $180,000, roughly $14,000 came back. The rest was gone. He was back working in sales. A different company, a smaller territory. He said he didn't regret trying, but that he'd been humbled by it in ways he hadn't expected. I listened to all of this. I didn't say I told you so, because I hadn't told him so. And I didn't say I was sorry in a way that would have been dishonest. I said, that's a hard thing to go through. He nodded. Then he said, Mom and Dad don't know the extent of it. I told them it didn't work out, but not the numbers. I said, that's between you and them. He looked at me for a moment. He said, are you ever going to talk to them again? I said, I already am, a little. I send cards. I texted Dad on his birthday. He said, that's not really talking. I said, I know. I'm still figuring out what I want it to look like. He looked around my office then, at the framed photo of the library build in Highlands, at the little whiteboard where Freddie and I track our project queue, at the coffee setup in the corner that my clients always comment on. He said, you've built something real here. I said, I know. It wasn't cold when I said it. It was just true. I didn't need him to confirm it, but I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't heard it. He left about an hour later. We hugged at the door. Awkward, the way hugs are when you've been out of practice. And he drove back to Knoxville. I stood in the shop for a while after he left. Freddie was in the back running a router, and the sound filled the space the way it always does, steady and purposeful. I thought about my brother not as the person who got the check, but as a person who tried something and failed and was carrying that quietly. I thought about my parents who had genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, who probably still believed it because the belief would be necessary to keep intact. I thought about the pot roast, the rosemary. My mother's voice sang equally twice. I don't forgive my parents in the clean, resolved way that makes a satisfying ending. I want to be honest about that because I think a lot of people get told that forgiveness is a destination and that once you arrive there, everything behind you disappears. That hasn't been my experience. What I've arrived at is something more like clarity. I understand now that my parents raised me with a particular idea of who I was to them, and that idea protected them from seeing me fully. They needed me to be the steady one, because if I wasn't steady, something in their picture of our family would have to shift. I was never going to be the investment. I was always going to be the proof. Understanding that doesn't make it not hurt, but it means I'm not waiting anymore for them to revise the picture. I'm not holding my breath for the call where my mother says, "We see now what we did." I hope for it, sometimes in the small quiet hours. But I don't require it. My mother called in November. A real call, not a text. I picked up. She sounded older. We talked about nothing important for a few minutes, the weather, a neighbor I half remembered, a recipe she'd tried, and then she went quiet for a moment and said, "I miss you." I said, "I know, Mom." She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. I'm not sure she fully knows even now what the apology would be for. Families are like that sometimes. The harm is real, but the people who caused it genuinely can't see the shape of it. We talked for 23 minutes. When we hung up, I sat at my desk and didn't move for a while. That was 8 months ago. We talk now, occasionally. My father and I text sometimes. Nothing deep, the way men in my family don't do deep over text. My brother and I have had dinner twice in Asheville, at a place near the river that he likes. It's not repaired. I don't know if repaired is the right word or even the right goal. What it is cautious and honest and small in a way that I can manage. I don't pretend the dinner never happened. I don't bring it up every time either. I have 3 employees now. I just signed a contract with a hospitality group to furnish 6 boutique hotel rooms in Greenville. The loan I took out 8 years ago has been paid off for 3 years. Last spring, I bought a house, 12 minutes from the shop. Small yard, good bones. I painted the living room myself on a Saturday in April while music played through a secondhand speaker and the windows were open and the air smelled like rain. I didn't call anyone to tell them. I just stood there in the middle of the room with a roller in my hand and looked at the walls I owned, in the house I owned, built on the work I had done. That was enough. That was more than enough. There's a thing people say about healing, that it happens when you stop needing the person who hurt you to understand what they did. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think you can understand something intellectually and still ache for the acknowledgement. I think both things can be real at the same time. What I know is this: the ache doesn't run my life anymore. The shop opens at 7. Freddie gets there first. He likes the quiet before the machines start. I usually pull up around 7:30 with coffee and whatever I've been thinking through on the drive. We talk about the work. We solve problems that have real solutions. We make things that didn't exist before and then we put them in the world. That's what I was always going to be. Even when no one in my family had a frame for it. Even when all it got me was a nod and the word practical and the understanding that I was expected to figure it out on my own. I figured it out. I am still figuring it out. And for the first time in a long time, that feels less like being left behind and more like being free. I've thought a lot about why my parents made the choice they made, not to relitigate it. I'm past the point where I need to win that argument, but because I think understanding the why is the only way I've been able to stop carrying it like something unresolved. Here's what I believe now. They weren't being cruel. They were being consistent. They had decided, somewhere along the way, probably without ever putting it into words, that I was the kind of person who didn't require investment. And the thing about that kind of decision is that it compounds. Every time I handled something on my own, it confirmed their theory. Every time I didn't ask for help, because I'd learned not to bother, they took it as proof that I was fine. The responsibility for seeing me clearly was always mine, and I kept failing to demand it. That's not an excuse for what they did. It's a cause. And causes matter, because if you only ever look at what happened and never at why, you end up furious at the outcome instead of honest about the pattern. I was furious for a long time. The anger was real, and it was earned. But anger that doesn't eventually turn into understanding just becomes a room you live in. What I kept coming back to, especially in that first year when I stopped answering Sunday calls, was a question my friend asked me once. What did I actually want from them? Not in a rhetorical way. Genuinely. Did I want the money? No. I built without it, and I was glad I had. Did I want an apology? Yes, but more than that, I wanted them to see me. To see the work and the loan and the peanut butter winters and the sawdust and the 14-hour days and say, "We understand now what you were doing all along." They haven't said that. I don't know if they ever will. But here's the thing I learned. Slowly and not without cost, you can't outsource your own sense of worth to the people who underestimated you. If I had needed my parents to validate the shop before I believed in it, I would have shut the doors a long time ago. The shop is real because I made it real. Freddie shows up at 7 because the work is real. The contracts, the clients, the walnut and the white oak and the drawer boxes that fit without forcing. None of that exists because someone handed me a check and a belief. It exists because I kept showing up even when the math was tight and the future was uncertain and no one in my family had a frame for what I was building. That's what I want to say to anyone sitting somewhere tonight feeling like the one who got left out of the picture. Not that it doesn't hurt. It does. And it will for longer than you expect. But the picture they have of you is not the only picture. It's not even the most accurate one. The most accurate one is being written right now, in the choices you make when no one is watching and no one is offering you a head start. My brother lost most of the $180,000. He's okay. He's working, and I think he's humbler for it, and when we had dinner last spring he laughed at himself in a way that felt real. I don't feel satisfied by his loss. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people expect that part of the story to feel like justice, and it doesn't. It just feels like life, which is messier and sadder and more complicated than any version of justice I could have designed. What does feel like something, I don't have a cleaner word for it than that, is standing in my own living room, with paint on my hands, in a house I bought with money I made, doing work I chose. That feeling isn't about them at all. That's the point. That's what took me 10 years to understand. You don't build a life to prove something to the people who doubted you. You build it because it's yours to build. And when you finally stop waiting for permission to believe in yourself, that's not an ending. That's just the beginning of the real work.